of it. It's just more creating a space and place for them to experiment. I think you probably remember this from my class, maybe not, but I often would say ministry is like a laboratory. A lot of people don't like that. I shouldn't say a lot, but some would be like, well, it's not so messy. I'm like, in some ways it is. And then we don't totally know. We just go out there and we do stuff and see what God does with that, right? And then if it didn't work, okay, that didn't mean that we were wrong. We tried something, didn't pan out. That's okay. We'll try something else again. Instead of taking it as like a failure, like, oh man, we totally did things wrong. We should never do something like that again. No, we were experimenting. We were trying. We were taking a risk, and see what happens. So, and let you kind of do something and see what God does with it. And I think that's exciting to see different leaders, different kids, different people take that risk. Another one, of course, is exciting is to see people who are part of community group then say, hey, I want to host. I want to be a leader now. And that is cool to see them want to take another step forward. Especially this one couple who he didn't grow up in the church. He was hurt by the church for a period of time, partly because of his own. He had an unhealthy marriage and ended up getting a divorce, and he would own that. Like it was a lot of it's on him. But through that process, he was like he didn't really didn't want to go to church again. He gets remarried to this other woman who did not grow up in the church, but she through some different challenges and stuff ends up exploring Christianity, coming to Jesus and says, hey, I think we should go to church together. And he was like, oh man, I was hoping to get away from that. The last wife I had, we did the church thing and it blew up. Like, I don't want to do this. But then he starts coming with her, and they have a sweet experience in one of my community groups, and then wants to lead. And they're doing a great job. There's this beautiful authenticity to them. They don't do everything perfectly. They still have some rough edges, of course, but they're learning and growing in a way that's very genuine. And so I think, again, creating that space and place to see what God does and allowing the imperfect people to still serve instead of looking for that perfect servant, which it doesn't exist. But and just walking alongside them and seeing what happens is, I think, really exciting.
Yeah, definitely. Can you tell me about some of the challenges and failures that you've encountered through those?
Sure. I think the biggest, and you can read books after book over this, but the thing that I always, the hurt is where you have someone who you thought you had just a beautiful connection with, and they had a healthy relationship with the Lord, walk away, and not just walk away from the ministry, but walk away from the faith altogether. And again, there's always hope. And I've recently been encouraged like this. I had this one youth kid who I knew had a tough story, right? He was adopted and struggled a lot in school because of some of the the lack of development that he had being in an orphanage in another country for a long time, and then and then was in a family that was overall good, but very strict, and so it's kind of a lot of hurt there, and then goes off to college, totally lives the prodigal story, and you're just like, man, what did I do? And then there was a group of like him and a couple other friends, stuff like that, where you're just like, man, what happened? And again, there's all these excuses. Like I knew their stories, like they had some tough relationships with their parents, some bad exposure to other things, and just their own selfish, pride that we all struggle with, and wanting to do their own thing and not miss out on what the world had to offer. And so just, chasing these different things. But then he's been recently he recently had this just powerful moment and felt like he needed to go back to church, and felt God just speaking to him through dreams, and he's been coming to church regularly. And so there's a victory there. But again, the ones that, especially the ones that you serve with, there's another one where he was a leader of mine for a few years, led our boys' trips to Joshua Tree, and now doesn't have anything to do with the church as far as I know, and just to see that that, whatever the popular term, of course, deconstruction or, but just seeing this like, man, what happened, because then it taints the moment that you had. Like when we were praying around the fire at that boys trip, when we were worshiping together at that camp, and you were a leader with these boys and speaking truth into them, like what, where did that all go? Those are probably the biggest heartaches, is seeing that happen.
Yeah. What are some challenges?
Other challenges, of course, is like staff dynamics, in church, where you have an idea of what kind of decision should be made, and another decision. How do you work through that? Different, the deepest disagreements, of course, are over values. And as much as we Christians, you think would have all the same values, there's a lot of values that aren't necessarily based in the Bible, but we all, like cleanliness versus messiness, or like punctuality versus, being a little more spontaneous. All those values that are neither bad or good, they just are what they are. Sometimes those can really create friction on the staff, and then sometimes you come away like, man, I would have totally made that decision differently, and the decision that was made is impacting your schedule or your the way your ministry is going to kind of work, and so those are challenges, learning how to roll with it and let it go, and other times when to speak up and say, hey, have you really thought this through or thought about this? Because churches have a way, ministries have a way of impacting each other, and sometimes what's hard is when you're not the guy, you're not in every decision-making meeting, but then you have to live with the results of that decision. Sometimes you're like, man, if I had been there and able to share my perspective, or I'd been there and be able to share a little bit of the impact that this decision may have, maybe they would have changed it or modified it or done it a little differently, and it would have turned out, differently. But then again, that gets back to who am I to judge, like what's better or worse? But same thing. It's hard sometimes to kind of watch things play out, and having to kind of like, okay, do an adjustment. Even though it wasn't your call, you need to be a good soldier and support the decision, but it's kind of creating a issue for you. Anyway, so there's those things.
Yeah. And so in terms of community groups as well, like what failures and challenges have you been able to face with those?
Well, you always feel a bit like, probably the more recent one is like, I've been really hoping to have like this younger, I don't do them by ages or stages, but some naturally trend older or trend younger. And so there's this one, these two couples who are both they're in their 30s, have little kids, both have had a lot of experience being in ministry or serving in churches before. I thought, okay, this could be a really dynamic group. And they had a decent experience, but, they also have other goals and things like that, and both decided not to host again this spring, and then can I get them back? And I have other couples like that where it's like, it seemed like they had a good experience. I thought they're doing a great job, and then they're like, no, we don't want to host anymore, and they don't even participate in community group, and that's that part where you're like, it's not that necessarily I can find other leaders to replace them. But when you see someone who has a gift or who does a good job at something and then they decide to stop doing it, it's like, well, why? Why are you doing that? The hard part is with adults, you have much less ability to persuade or, kind of challenge like you can with youth. And so I have to be gentle and careful and just say they made a decision to do things differently, and that's okay. But part of me wants to have that kind of heart-to-heart, like, hey, what's going on here? Where are you coming from? What is this the healthiest thing? Because I know for some, especially in our culture today, there's so many who give in to anxiety and like, I'm just too overwhelmed. I need to just really isolate and simplify my life. And I just, more and more, especially from what I'm seeing in my classroom too, in my other job, is I just push back against that. Like, no, isolating is not the answer. You need to let go of those anxieties and let go of that perfectionism of having everything just right, just the way you want it, to customize your life to exactly all your needs and wants. That's not how we're going to serve our world. We have to be able to, pick up our cross. and endure a little bit, put ourselves into tough situations, and be okay with it, everything being a little, funky or off or whatever. So those are the conversations in my head that I'd like to have with them. It's like, okay, let's be real. Okay, you struggle with this anxiety, fear thing, and how can we help you to get back into serving? Because it's not just healthy for you, it's healthy for your marriage, healthy for your kids. It's to really put aside that and to serve. And if it's not with community groups, that's fine, with something else. But I just see this kind of inward, like self-love kind of mentality for some. And that's the part I think I struggle the most in community groups is because some people, they have in their mind like what it's going to look like, and then they actually get the people in their room like, oh, this is a little bit of work. This isn't all fun. We're not just going to be like, hey, the best of friends and playing like Uno or other games, and just having barbecues and stuff like that. Like you get some, what we call extra care personalities in there, and it's hard to serve them. And so to learn to work through that, those frustrations, and it's not always easy, and still find joy in the serving. I think that's my challenge. People on staff at churches struggle with that, right? Head pastors struggle with that all the time. Of like, man, serving my congregation can be a real chore, and I just want to, I would just wish people would just buy in and just run with this, But it's, we're all imperfect. So I think that's the part with my community group leaders, figuring a way to keep that going. And also I think what goes with that for any leader like myself is to not focus on that negative all the time. It's like, okay, so yeah, a few couples that I thought were going to be dynamic leaders aren't serving, but I have all these other ones who are, and be thankful for them and to pour into them. There's that balance of, okay, yes, we're supposed to pursue the one lost sheep out of the 99. In some ways, that's God's job, right, to pursue that. My job is to pour into the ones that I have in front of me, and then listen to God if He's like, you should go, should pursue that person even though they're not there. That's good too. So that's probably the challenge is where to focus my energies or how to have balance in that, and in recruiting and trying to encourage those who are struggling, and then also to pour into the ones who really love it, and so they can do even more.
Mm-hmm. Do you ever see people from the youth group that you served with? Do you ever see them going into the community groups?
Most of them aren't quite. I have more like former youth leaders. I've had one or two there. But in terms of actually youth kids, most of them aren't quite to that age yet that would really be wanting. I had one recently that tried it, but they had a brand new baby and the scheduling hasn't worked out. Right now at our church we have a young adult ministry called YAMS for short that goes from 18 to 28. So most of my former youth kids would be in that ministry if they're still at our church, and haven't quite gotten to the wanting to be the adults in community groups. That's something that me and the other guy who oversees YAMS, who talked a little bit about how to help make that transition happen. But I think in general, right, a lot of churches across the country are struggling with that. How to have the younger generation stick around and become part of the quote-unquote big church and be part of it, especially a church that's been around for a long time like ours. Like our pastor's been there for over 30 years, so it feels a little older at times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I know what you're talking about the responsibility of the youth pastor to help transition the high schoolers into a regular service, because there's often a very big divide between the youth group and the rest of the church. Have you found that to be true?
What?
Have you found that to be true? That there's a big divide?
Yes, I found that very, very much to be true. And I think, I've been reading, some books from Fuller Youth Seminary, or Fuller Seminary, their youth institute, and they talk about that regularly. I think that's something that a lot of churches struggle with. And so, yeah, I wish, and I don't know if I know the answer. I do know right now our youth guy, who you may know from the Bible College days, Cameron Seeley, he would like to see the youth be in the main sanctuary more often, not every week, but regularly in the with the adults, so they can get a chance to see what big church is like, see their parents worship, see all that. I think there's because in some ways what's been the model for a lot of churches for a long time, like you put the youth in a separate place where they have a separate style of church that meets them at their development age, which is very good reasons for that. But then it makes going to the big church such a different experience, and they're like, whoa, what is this? Or this feels so weird. I want to be a stiff adult yet. And so there's that part of it where I think segregating our church so much between ages sometimes hurts the ability for young adults to feel welcome into the church at large sometimes. But then again, some of it's also unfortunately from our culture around us outside the church is this glorification of youth. And so, and that youth should be separate. Like parents just don't understand this whole idea that, don't be with your parents for a long time. So there's a lot of young people, I think, who just buy into that whole mindset of, well, whatever my parents are doing, I am not going to do. And so they don't want to be in that situation. Honestly, I think what helps most kids is like when they go off to college or they leave the house, they find a different church that's not with their parents, and it's for some reason it allows them to feel more like, okay, I can be part of this, even though it's probably not much different than where they grew up. But there's just something about like them now choosing a church that doesn't have all these people who knew them when they were tiny, when they were little. They feel like they're surrounded by their aunts and uncles and grandparents, in a sense, right? And they can be who they are now as an adult at a church. I see, and that's where we have people on our staff who would love to see people born, grow up, and raise their kids in the same church. And that's a beautiful idea, but I think, especially in American culture today, I just don't see that playing out very often. I see more people, if they have a healthy relationship with Jesus, growing up in the church, but then as they get adult, picking a different church to provide a different experience, different voice in their lives, and also just to feel like, okay, I have a little bit of separation from my childhood and can grow up. Because even in our own patterns of our mind, right, we go into the same building that we were when we were 6 or 7, and it's hard not to revert a little bit in your mind, that. So it's almost healthy, I think, sometimes to find a different church when you're an adult, because it tricks your mind in a sense to see it in a different eyes, different perspective. Then just this last weekend for Easter, I went back home to visit my mom and went to the church that I went to when I was in high school. And it's very different now, but at the same time, it's like, I remember this, it's just the environment, the surroundings, the aesthetics kind of make you I almost feel like I'm back in high school again. And that sometimes can get in the way of me being able to grow and learn and receive the instruction there. So I think sometimes I wish for some adult ministry leaders, parents would encourage their kids to try different churches when they become at a certain age, instead of, no, you've got to go to the church that we go to, that we grew up in, because I think it helps them feel more free, I guess, or it helps with their mental approach, I think, to continuing their growth in their relationship with Jesus.
Mm-hmm. So if someone were to start from where you started, to start over in youth ministry or start over in community groups, what sort of advice would you give them starting out, or what advice would you have wanted to hear when you started out?
I think the advice that just from my own family members, and then just seeing it growing up and reading books also, is just be one, patient. What breaks my heart, like when I was teaching you guys in the youth ministry class, is I see people jump into youth ministry and then they're gone in 2 years, right? And that's so short. And that adds to that, like, kind of in our divorce culture, like this another adult who's gone in that kid's life, right? And so I just would encourage people, like, okay, think about how long you want to commit to it, and then double it and commit even longer, right? Just to give, like, to have that slow, steady growth mindset. So, like, if you're jumping into youth ministry, like, okay, unless it's really bad or something crazy happens, like, commit 4 to 5 years, right? To see, like, a freshman group all the way to high school. And same with the community group. Like, in my mind, I was like, okay, this is a 4 to 5 year process, and I'm going to commit 4 to 5 years to see this through unless something crazy happens, and not just be like, okay, I'm done after a year and a half, right? We have too many people who bounce so quick from one place to another, to another, to another. So I would just think, my preference would to see people like, okay, because that way you see it through the valley and the peak, right? It's going to be exciting for the first few months, and then the honeymoon's over or whatever, and then it's going to be frustrating. And if you stop then, you're going to have a bad taste in your mouth. You're going to have this negative perspective over your time in ministry. But if you, more often than not, just like marriage, right? And hopefully you're getting the same advice in premarital counseling. Is like, as you see it through, after 4 to 5 years, you get into this healthy rhythm, or you get into this place where you kind of figured out your style, your abilities. You've grown and learned. If you've committed to learning and being patient with this process, and you get to a place where you feel like you're in a decent groove. And there's something about when you stick around that long, whether you've done a good job or not, that perseverance, one, as we know in Scripture, builds character, but two, with people, it builds trust. And that is a thing that is so important that we tend to underestimate how long it takes to build trust, and how valuable that is. It's more valuable than the talent or charisma or skill that someone has in ministry, in my opinion. And so just being patient and commit longer term, even if you feel like you're missing out on missed opportunities or other things from other places, like, just take that time, because that's going to build trust. It's going to help you grow farther than you would have if you bounced earlier. And at least for me, my personality is like, okay, I committed 4 to 5 years, even though I feel like quitting right here, or if it's really frustrating, I'm going to hang in there, and see it through. And if it's still bad in 4 to 5 years, well, then there's my answer, But I think it also holds you, kind of provides an anchor for you to see things through, so that you get a more fuller experience and development that God has planned for you, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't have any more questions.
I think another one that I wish I had done in youth ministry that I didn't, but I have been doing with community groups, is I have my own small personal prayer team, like a group of people who I just send an email about once a month or so to, saying, hey, here's what's going on in the ministry. Please pray for this and pray for me in these ways. And it's not necessarily for my family prayer type of stuff. It's just more like having some people in my corner praying for me. And I think that's been a healthy thing. It helps me reflect and think about what's going on as I write those emails. And then to have them knowing that they're in my corner, I think is good. So that's something that I would suggest is, even if it's just like 2 or 3 people, and one of them's your grandma, have a prayer team that you communicate regularly with.
Mm-hmm. Well, anything else you'd like to say?
No, I think the main thing is we need, in ministry, I love that you're focusing on discipleship, and just, I don't think there's like a formula or anything. It's just slowing down and being available, and allowing God to work in different ways, and looking for those opportunities But I think if we could get more people to do that, instead of it being like a few celebrity pastor types, right, or podcast hosts or any of that, like getting back to that kind of, okay, I'm happy with serving 200 to 300 people and making an impact in my local community, and then seeing what God does with that. And maybe some missionaries are raised out of that. That's great, and being willing to do that. Or people end up creating a YouTube channel or a podcast or writing a book. That's great. But being willing to allow to get more hands into the work, right? To empowering people to participate in their faith instead of being such a consumer mindset. That's my hope and prayer for the church at large in America is to have participants instead of consumers.
Mm-hmm. What do you think the road there looks like?
That's a great question. It sounds like a PhD type of job for Jacob. I think, like a lot, if you've read some of these big books or whatever, I think, I think his name's Dave Kinnaman at, the Barna Group, I think is his name. But anyway, he focuses a lot on Israel's time in Babylon and saying, look, our models need to be Nehemiah. Our models need to be Daniel. In a post-Christian Western civilization, we need to learn how to serve competently, to be people that secular people trust, like Daniel and Nehemiah, but then to be bold in our faith at key times, and to be able to serve those who are not like us in a beautiful, powerful way. Tim Keller, in one of his books, he was famous for pointing out what this one Caesar wrote, we could totally stamp out the Christians if it wasn't for their generosity and just how the Christian community in the early Roman Empire, in that early time in the Roman Empire, were willing to, go to where the bubonic plague was and serve the people who were dying, who were willing to give money to their neighbors when that was so not the Roman culture, who were just willing to, so they weren't worried about building their wealth. They weren't worried about their safety. They wanted to make an impact and sacrifice for the people around them. And so the thing, where I live in Murrieta, which is known for being one of the safest cities in all of California, one of our idols is safety. And I constantly am trying to gently push people in our church to not be so concerned about being safe, but to be generous, to give, to sacrifice for people around them. And that's really hard when so much of the messaging in our culture is, take care of yourself, make sure you're safe, make sure you got your money, then you get yours, all that mindset. And so I think, but I know without fail, pretty much, when you are radically generous, it touches people around you, right? It really makes an impact. And so I think if we as Christians could be more willing to give our money and time, and that's where, again, it goes back, is that it makes an impact. So I think we need more stories and examples and creating a culture of generosity, of sacrifice and giving. And I think that speaks volumes to people around us who feel like that the whole society's a mess, or that especially Christians are a problem for America. I think the more we can be generous and give and not expect anything in return, and just not look for necessarily the results, but just I'm giving because I love, right? Because Christ calls me to. I think that can be really powerful.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for doing this interview. I really appreciate it. It's been really nice to hear from you again.
No problem. And if you need more later, let me know.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to interview you again, specifically about your leadership degree. That seems very interesting.
Okay, sure, if you'd like to.
Yeah.
And have fun planning the wedding, and congratulations. I hope you and Emma have a good time getting to the big day, and everything works out.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, again, Thank you.
All right, no problem, Jacob. Take care.
You too. Goodbye.